Look, we are standing here, quite frankly, on historic grounds, right here in Fifth Ward. And to just provide some general context before I get started, um, Evergreen Negro Cemetery is a historic cemetery, not just in the city of Houston, not just in Fifth Ward, but in the state of Texas. And it kind of goes everywhere from about 1890 or so to about 1966, but was quite active between 1910 and the 1930s. In Evergreen Negro Cemetery, and I say that very intentionally, because you have ex-slaves that are buried in this cemetery. You have people from Fifth Ward, residents of Fifth Ward buried here. Buffalo soldiers buried right here in Evergreen Negro Cemetery. You have veterans from World War I who are buried here. So a number of notable individuals are buried here. And because of the historic nature, some with names on the cemetery, on the markers, and then some without names. Um, we are standing on a site that exemplifies the work Metro is also doing to improve Houston's transportation infrastructure. This includes Metro's University bus rapid transit lines and work to improve drainage along Lockwood Drive in Fifth Ward. Some of you, as I've indicated, may know. Some of you may have been around in the 60s. Well, quite frankly, it was about in the 1940s that this Lockwood came through this cemetery, Evergreen Negro Cemetery. It was a two-way lane. Came through at that time, and so that goes into the 1940s, and then in the 1960, the city, along with its contractors, came through again, and it went from like two lanes to Esplanade in between. But the bottom line is that even in the 1940s, the city of Houston built this two-lane road, Lockwood, right through Evergreen Negro Cemetery. And the reality is, a lot of the infrastructure done in the city of Houston during this time, the 40s, the 50s, and 60s, really cut through historic African American assets or spaces, dividing and right through. And this is the same way that happened here. Evergreen Negro Cemetery is the third oldest African American cemetery in Houston, according to the Texas State Historical Association. And at one time, the site was owned by one of the founders, Fifth Ward resident, businessman, and former slave A.K. Kelly. And there's a lot of history here, and we are standing near that sacred ground, and there are people who know this story better probably than most who are here. In 1960, the city of Houston first expanded Lockwood Drive with the installation of this esplanade, and the work split the cemetery. And then when Lockwood was expanded, the city agreed that all of the caskets, those who were buried here, interred here, would be relocated in the cemetery on both sides of Lockwood. They reached out to many of the families and asked for their permission, but the understanding that was made by the city of Houston to those families, to the community, is that those bodies would be respectfully removed and then placed on both sides of Lockwood in the cemetery. And some would say that they removed as many as 400, let's say give or take. But they were supposed to have removed all of them, and placed them respectfully on both sides. As part of the archaeological due diligence being conducted recently by Metro during the planning phase of this new project. It was discovered that not all of those bodies had been removed in the Esplanade. In fact, about 33 grave sites were found underneath the Esplanade. Of the 33 grave locations recorded, 30 were identified as being, my notes say disinterred prior to road construction in the 1960s. The crews discovered the remains of three people remaining in these grave sites, and also discovered some personal effects. The discovery is both disturbing and disappointing, and it is clear that the city and its contractors did not remove all of the persons that were buried in Evergreen Negro Cemetery, and especially as it relates to the Esplanade. It doesn't go unnoticed that this is an historic cemetery, and this infrastructure ran right through it. I have, in conversations with Metro, with the CEO, with the chairman of the board, Sanjay Ram, and their teams on Friday of last week, asked that everything be suspended so that we can check and double check on what remain there. And we will work closely with Project Respect and the Fifth Ward community to ensure that the recently discovered remains are properly and respectfully relocated, and that Evergreen Negro Cemetery is preserved and maintained. We will ensure that appropriate steps are taken to make sure that we honor those who have been buried here and honor the history of those who have been buried here. And quite frankly, just disappointed on the work that was done in the 1960s and how it was done. It was one thing to put the infrastructure through the cemetery in the 1940s, then to come back in the 1960s to put the lanes on both sides with the Esplanade in between, and then not do the work in the manner it should have been done, and quite frankly, to respect those who were buried in this cemetery. And now we are faced in 2023 with the task of honoring those who were buried here, their descendants, the people in this community, and recognizing that this is an historic cemetery. And the question for us is, how do we move forward? It's not about the city just coming in and saying, this is what we will do, but it is about making sure as we move forward that we are working with Project Respect and others who over the years who have worked to maintain this cemetery, to work with the Fifth Ward community and its residents, to work with any of the descendants, to work with the stakeholders, to make sure that we have a suitable path forward that will address those remains, and at the same time work to preserve and maintain this cemetery as we go forward. What I made clear is not just about removing and replacing in the Evergreen Negro Cemetery. It's about making sure that the city correct a wrong that has been done as much as possible, and respecting spaces within our city. So the city, Metro, Houston Public Works, and Project Respect, and others are committed to doing the right thing with remembrance, respect, and reflection to ensure that the remains are given a proper reinterment. Throughout history, African American cemeteries have not always been preserved and protected, and graves were routinely disturbed, and a part of our collective history was lost. The remains discovered at this historic cemetery are part of that black history, which is American history. And we owe it to those who were buried here, and quite frankly, to those who have yet to come, to remember these families and to give them a final resting place with dignity and respect. And it is unfortunate we're having to address this in 2023. But whenever you find a situation, it is important that we face up to it, that we acknowledge it, and we find a suitable path forward.